Welcome back to our project series. Today we're going to be continuing right where we left off with the engine. So we got the engine stand all complete. Cue the B-roll. So by means of a brief recap, last time we left off, we have this engine that we took out of our project boat, and we built this custom engine stand for it. The reason being is that we actually have a couple of this exact engine laying around. So having a custom made stand for this particular type of engine is actually really beneficial for our shop. So we're gonna hang on to this whole stand here. This gives us a really nice way to work on this without worrying about it tipping over or moving around. Typically these will move quite a bit, even with the locking pin. So it's nice to just have it nice and steady and fastened down securely. Now last video we were also talking about how one of the rivets is missing from this part of the engine. So this engine coupler piece actually had an issue where one of the rivets was missing completely from it. But like we said last video, we can replace it and you won't even be able to notice which one it is. So I think you can probably pick out which one has been replaced, but needless to say, they are all fastened in properly, and we went around and refastened them as well. Now, a cool little thing that Cute Ball there was showing me when he was doing this is you have to actually heat these rivets up, the ones that are existing, so the oil can escape out from in between the rivet and the metal. And then once that happens, you can begin fastening it down. Because if you imagine, if there's oil inside of this cavity where the rivet is, when you go to fasten it, it'll create a bit of a hydraulic lock and it'll never actually be fastened. And then eventually, once that oil gets flung out of there, the rivet will be loose again. So we heated these up just enough to get the oil out, and then we refastened them all down, including our new heat tempered installed rivet as well. Now, the other really exciting thing about this motor is we were able to actually find a manual online for this motor. You can see it says Gray Marine 4 and 6 cylinder gasoline engine. And if we take a look at this one, see it's the Gray Marine and it's a 6 cylinder. It's really as simple as that with these old boat motors. I know in the car world it can get quite tricky differentiating the different types of motors, the different sizes. These marine engines are Gray Marine 6 cylinder. That's it right there. So it makes it nice for shops when they're working on them because they know what to expect with these, but there isn't really a lot of variety with them. Now, of course, every manufacturer is different, but in this particular case with Gray Marine, this is what it is, which is awesome because we have parts laying around all over the place for these. So today's video, we are going to be tearing this engine down to the long block. So what's the difference between a short block and a long block? Well, on a short block, you would have the engine block itself. You would take the head off of the motor, and it would probably include the crank and the pistons and such. But on a long block, you'd actually leave the head of the engine on, and you would be leaving the crankshaft and the pistons and everything else involved with making the engine run internally installed. The oil pan would be coming off for a long block, and all of the accessories as well would be coming off. A deluxe long block, on the other hand, which isn't a term you hear very much, would be, you know, the manifold would stay on and maybe the exhaust headers and such. But we're going to be tearing it down to long block today. And that includes getting off the water pump, the distributor, the plugs, everything like that. We're just going to be tearing it down and getting everything cleaned up. And like I said, we're going to be polishing up the brass. We're going to be restoring the color to a lot of different things on here. And then we're also going to be trying to find a matching green color to the dashboard in our boat. Now, before we get right into that, I just want to quickly go over this maintenance handbook. So if you guys are in need of this maintenance handbook, please send us an email and we can send you a copy of this. I do believe that one of the people who watches this video mentioned in a comment last time he is restoring a very similar, if not the same, model of boat. So if you're in need of this, please give us a message. We're here to help you guys. So this manual here, it contains quite a lot of information on this engine. For example, if we just flip to any random page here, it'll talk about the cranking motor, the starter, and it actually goes down into a little breakdown of the windings and how it's actually all completely built. Now this is very useful. Let's say, for example, the starter. I take the starter out, I want to rebuild it, which I will be doing. And for whatever reason, I can't figure out how one little spring or one little plate or a pressure pin or something goes back together. That's where these manuals come in handy, because you can just take a look at it and you can say to yourself, oh, okay, well, I have to put this plate ahead of this spring. It doesn't go behind it. And little things like that will really help you rebuild these. Keep in mind, they are fairly simple for what they are. I mean, it's an old Flathead. If you've seen one of these, you've seen a million. But it is always good to just reference these every now and then and make sure you have a good idea of what you're looking at. And talking about that again here, that can be useful even for not just external, but internal components as well. So if you take a look at the transmission, it actually has a breakdown on where snap rings go, where the bolts go, everything like that. I'm not going to be rebuilding the transmission. I took a look at it when it was here last time. There's plenty of material on this reverse band. So I'm not too concerned about that. But again, this is just really nice to have, really nice to reference, and has lots of really useful information in here, including troubleshooting information. So we have this. I have tons of experience tearing down these old engines, so I think we're good to go on this. And if you're watching this video because you're trying to learn how to tear down these gray marine engines, this is the video for you. I'm going to be teaching you guys everything you need to know about tearing these down. And if you stay tuned to the rest of our series, I'll also walk you guys through the process of restoring and rebuilding the long block back up. Again, we're not going to be sending it to a machine shop. We're not going to be getting the heads done, but just the process of getting it cleaned up so it looks presentable. So to start off, we're going to be taking a look at the cooling system and the water pump system on this engine. Now I'm going to be speaking about this particular engine as if it was an automotive engine that had been switched to marine. The point of that is that I'm trying to establish some common ground here so you guys can get a better understanding of how the system all works. So on your typical automotive engine, you're going to have your water pump, you're going to have a thermostat, and you're going to have a cooling fan. Now on these engines, they're somewhat similar, except they use freshwater intake. So how that'll work is the water will be pumped in to the system, and that water intake will be right here. It'll go through these little impellers and it'll get pumped down into this junction box. Now you'll have your water jackets, you'll have the areas around the cylinder head, and then you'll have, of course, this that will be cooling down. I believe that pipe goes up and around to the exhaust manifold area. So you can imagine as you're boating along the water is being picked up, pumped into here, getting circulated through the whole system, and then the heated water is then getting pumped out of the exhaust manifold with the exhaust fumes. Now, as for any sort of thermostat, this particular gray marine is actually equipped with an upgraded part. So this piece right here is called the ThermoGuard. Now this unit was first introduced in 1946 for these gray marine engines. And service of this ThermoGuard involves removing this large hex nut and taking out the little element inside of it and making sure it's free from contamination. It's important that you do this weekly if it's in sandy water, monthly in salt water, once every season in freshwater applications. And then of course you'll tighten back up the hex nut. Now over on this side we can see one of the lines here that goes up into the manifold area. Here. Now the intent of this is to cool down the heat exhaust system as well as disperse any of the heated water from the system. And you can also see the bypass coming off of this ThermoGuard going to the exit of the manifold over on this end here. So that's the one big difference that these marine engines have, is the cooling system. Everything else is pretty straightforward. Now this has some interesting features on it. It is actually a maintenance item. So I'd suggest, every season or so, you check these, but essentially inside here, you're gonna have your pump. Now it is a wearable item. You can replace the insides, but thanks to the ingenuity of these old engine designers, they actually put in these little serviceable caps right here. Now, if you unscrew them, you'll see in the end of them, someone has serviced this in the past, but there's grease in there. The point of that grease, again, is to keep this running in a fine way so that it's lubricated. But how these work is once it's threaded on very gently, you will see at a certain point that it will be a little bit tougher to move. So right here, it's getting a little bit more resistant. Now how these work is every year or so, you just want to kind of wind them in just a little bit until you feel a little bit of resistance. And then you know that the grease is now pushing up inside of this water pump system. And you do that to both sides, you just kind of wind them in. And finally, the last little piece here I'll cover before we start tearing it apart. This is actually driven, if you notice here, the couplers and the shaft, it's driven from the back of the generator. But the back of it actually comes off here and goes straight to this water pump. Super cool little design how they would do that. On typical automotive applications, the water pump would actually be on the side with the belt, and you would see a little pulley where it would go up to. Possibly on these older engines, they usually went with 2 belts instead of a tensioner system. But that's how you'd see it on an automotive application instead of this cool little rod here. So another neat little thing about marine engines. So there you go, it's as easy as that. You can see the little slots where this impeller shaft will actually stick into. Kind of another neat little design. It has these rubber isolators, and it's as simple as just pushing it into place. So nothing to be super concerned with, not very difficult to remove, so let's carry on. Now, in case you're wondering what the inside of that looks like or how servicing it would look like, if you stay tuned to the series, we will actually be covering how to rebuild them. I'm going to be going in depth on reconstruction of these systems, so make sure you subscribe if you're interested in that sort of thing. Because like I said, I will be completely rebuilding that water pump, polishing it, making it look really nice, and then reinstalling it. So if you want to see that, or if you're having troubles yourself trying to rebuild one of them, please follow along with us. And I have lots of information I'm trying to share, trying to get this culture, this wooden boat culture out there a little bit more. So anything I can do to help further that. And the gentleman up front who does all of the office work there, his name's Brandon. He's pretty prompt on replying to any comments or questions that you guys may have, and any technical information gets deferred over to myself or Andrew, and we would be happy to share the information that we have. So drop a comment, and Brandon will be happy to shoot you a message back. Even myself too, I replied to a few of the comments as well. So next we're going to be taking off the heat exchanger, so let's get going into that. So there we go, we got off the water stuff on this side here. I like to keep the fasteners where they come from, but we're gonna keep carrying on here. And next I'm gonna be removing the starter as well as the generator, and we'll get those off next. So there you go, that's one side of the engine stripped down there. I got all the water pump system taken off, as well as the starter and the generator. So you can kind of see what we're dealing with. We actually have, looks like a little bit of black mold on the engine. So make sure I get all that cleaned up. It's not very good for your health. I mean, and then yeah, we'll keep going on here. Going to flip the engine around and we'll get going on the other side of it. So let's cover what we have on this side of the engine. So starting over on the left side here, we have our oil pressure sender, we have our fuel bowl and our fuel pump, as well as this is a crankcase draft vent tube. So instead of modern day PCV systems where they recirculate pressure coming out of the engine back into the intake manifold, these old engines would just spray it right back out. This engine, however, is clean enough, if you want to call it that, where it sprays it into the carburetor to be recirculated. So this is as close to PCV systems as they had back in the day. I actually have a 1946 Buick Straight 8 that I'm working on in my own personal life, and that engine has one of these lines coming off of it that just dumps straight down underneath, so the air can kind of Venturi effect out the oil. which has led to the entire bottom of my vehicle being completely coated in oil. It's nice to see that they're at least trying to combat that a little bit by pumping this down into the air intake on the carburetor. Now, another thing that's really cool about these marine engines, and I hadn't really noticed this before with these, is the carburetors, instead of being up on the top of the engine and having the air come down and then the fuel be sprayed down to create a mist, it's actually completely opposite. So the air comes in this way and then it gets sucked up and the fuel gets sucked up with it. So flooding these engines is quite easy to do due to the fact that if you aren't cranking it, or the crank is going too slow, or whatever reason, and there's not enough vacuum, the fuel will actually just fall straight down into the bottom right in here, and you'll actually have a pool of fuel in the bottom of these carburetors that you got to clean out. Something kind of funny I just noticed. It's like somebody has put a Robertson screw where this one was supposed to be. Can't wait to see what kind of threads I'm dealing with there. It's definitely a wood screw. Now, something I will mention about these carburetor systems, the engine may be always essentially the same, but the carbs might be a little bit different. You've got to really be careful with carburetors. So thankfully I have this video series itself to refer back to in case I ever misplace something. Or for example, even this, like, where is this bolt supposed to go on this hole, on this one? Having some sort of evidence so I can refer back to it to put it back the way it was is very helpful. A lot of the time the manual will only tell you so much, and then sometimes, like this part itself, I don't know, maybe this is factory, maybe it isn't. The manual again will only tell you so much about each engine, and a lot of the time they're speaking in kind of some vague terms because there is, you know, a couple of different variations of this one. So always make sure you either get a video or a whole bunch of pictures of how everything goes so that you can put it back the way it goes in the future. But let's just take a little look at this mechanical linkage. Such a sucker for mechanical stuff. Look at that. Isn't that cool? I just love that. You actually have, if you look up on this side, a little adjustment piece too. So if one of them's getting a little bit more throttle than the other, you can actually adjust them as well. Super neat. Now we got the carburetors off, so now we're going to be getting this fuel bowl out, and I just want to show you guys how we remove this. So on the bottom of here, there's this tiny little thing that you spin, and that loosens off the tension to the fuel bowl. Just very carefully do this. Make sure you're holding the fuel bowl, and then it just drops out of the way. And there's the fuel. You pour that into the container you got, but that's how these little things function, so you can get these out of the way without making a big mess, which is really nice. I like it. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with mechanical fuel pumps, how this works is there is a big piece of leather right here, or whatever material that you would have used, that is in a big circle, and in the middle of it there's a little plunger that pushes it up, and that pumps the fuel. The little plunger in here that moves up and down is controlled by a lever that's on a pivot. You can see the pivot point right here, and it'll do this, pushing that plunger up and down, and that lever actually rides on the camshaft. So there'll be a lobe on the camshaft that lever goes to. So when you're removing these, it can be a little tricky. You can get all the bolts off, but they don't really want to come out. And the reason for that, there we go, that one came out nice, is sometimes this little lever can get pinned up against the camshaft in such a way where it's a little bit difficult to remove. And also when you're going to install them, you can't just jam them back in place. You have to make sure that that lever is like in the proper position when you put it in, otherwise you will never be able to install this. it'll just be a bit of a fight. Now, again, we are going to be rebuilding most of the things here. The mechanical fuel pump I will be rebuilding as well. These should be rebuilt every now and then because they will begin to leak and degrade over time. And if you guys remember the video before, the color of the fuel that was coming out of this engine when we first tried to start it was absolutely horrendous. So if there's any residual bits of what we saw from that fuel in this fuel pump, I want it removed. So I'm going to make sure that we get this nice and clean so we don't have any debris plugging up our carburetors, especially after we get those rebuilt as well. Just to make sure I really got all the accessories off first, I'm first going to remove the distributor, the coil, the plugs, and the cables as well. Now, before I completely tear this apart, I thought it would be kind of cool to show you how exactly the distributor works. So if you take a look here, you can see the distributor shaft runs from here all the ways down and through. So you'll see the spiral gear coming off of the shaft of the distributor. This will come out with the distributor in one foul swoop. Sometimes it is actually broken in half, not damaged, but it'll be splined into this gear just in case it's difficult to remove the gear. So it is possible that when I take this out, the gear doesn't come with it. But anyways, it goes onto this spiral gear right here, connected to this gear, which connects to the camshaft gear. So it runs directly, essentially, through a couple of different gears from the camshaft. And that's how these distributors are able to spin at exactly the precise moment. I like to refer to this as mechanical electronics. You have a signal coming from here, and through a variety of gears, they're able to make it go into an electrical signal, which I think is just so cool. And then as this rotor rotates around on this shaft piece right here, it's maintaining contact with the coil, and it is providing a path to go out to each of these contact points on the distributor cap, which in turn then goes to the spark plug. And what actually turns the spark on and off, down here, you have your little contact points. So now we have the ignition system all removed, minus the spark plugs. I'm just gonna leave them in for now. They're essentially just plugging the holes up. There isn't really a point to take them out at this moment. We are gonna be replacing them at some point too, just to be safe. They do look like they're in fairly good condition, but better safe than sorry. Might as well replace them while we got everything apart. Now, all that being said, the next steps are we're going to be removing this, the intake and exhaust manifold, and then the thermal guard system as well. Now I've worked on a lot of these vintage engines, and typically the exhaust ports are usually just flooded with carbon, sometimes even the intake ports as well. But I mean, if you look at them, they're not that bad. Like, look at the soot. There's hardly, oh, there we go, there's a bit of soot. I mean, there's hardly anything in there for what it is. It's a rather interesting style bolt. I can't say I've ever seen that before. Reverse threaded, kind of neat. So there we go, there's the inside of this engine. Now, how this all functions, you'll have the camshaft running along the bottom. I know I mentioned it was on the other side by the fuel pump, but I believe it may just be a mechanical gearing thing over to a singular lobe for that, because the cam is most definitely on this side. And each little cam will be running underneath here, and you'll have the lifters that ride on top of the cam lobes being pushed up into the springed area and controlling the movement of that. You'll notice how nice these move. Now, they're not loose, if that's what you're wondering. How these operate is this will be the lifter. The part that's spinning is all one piece, and then this will be your valve, and that is not connected to this. So how it works is when you're trying to set the distance for the valve lash there, it'll be adjusted here. So this will be your locking nut, this will be the adjustment screw, and this is the actual lifter. So seeing them move like this is actually a good thing, because it means that they are free, there's nothing holding them up, and any of these ones that aren't moving are currently just under tension at the moment. You can actually tell because the lifter is lifted up a little bit, so you can see that there. You can also see a couple of the lifters lifted up here as well. Keep in mind that there will always be a couple of valves open. It's just simply how the engine operates. So yeah, it's kind of cool to see how these ones are backwards, these flathead engines. Now, another thing I'm going to say is, as useful as these manuals are, they have quite a lot of information. Sometimes they don't have the exact information you may need. For example, I've done this before in the past where you take out an oil pan bolt and you set it down, and then you take out the next one and you take out the next one. And by the time you're on your 5th or 6th bolt, you look down and realize that you have 2 or even 3 different sizes of bolts and you have no idea where they go. I remember one time at one of the jobs I was working, we were working on a Ferrari, and we were removing the oil pan, and there was the difference of 2 threads between one bolt and the other bolt. That's it, 2 threads. And if we were to wind the slightly longer one into the slightly smaller hole, you run a really big risk of cracking the block. So this is an old flathead, so it's not going to be 1 or 2 threads. But this old flathead, it's going to be quite noticeable. You'll have a bolt this long, and you'll maybe have one here, sometimes even here, depending, especially towards the front and rear, you'll notice a difference. But just again, another thing to be mindful of, because looking at the manual, trying to figure out which bolt goes where, trying to figure it out, piece it together, just takes a lot of time. And it's better if you're just being really observant and making sure that they're either A, all the correct size, or B, you're making a cardboard cutout template. Now, this is one of my favorite tricks to doing these. So say for instance, you're working on a vehicle and you're not sure which bolt is going to go where once you reassemble it, and there's a lot of information on there on that piece that is tricky to remember. Let's say you're doing a water pump on a BMW or something like that. So what you want to do is draw the rough shape out on a piece of cardboard. Make sure you indicate which side is which. All right, and then you count how many bolts are on the oil pan side. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I got 8 right there, and I'm going to indicate them. get a screwdriver, or whatever you have, pop a hole through here, yada yada, so on and so forth. Now once you have all the holes punched out in the piece of cardboard, you put the fastener you just took out into the piece of cardboard. Not only does this keep your bolts safe, it also shows you exactly where they go, and on top of it, when you're ready to reassemble, you can just spray paint the bolt heads on this piece of cardboard and you won't be touching them, getting sticky fingers on them, whatever. And yeah, it's just an all-around really awesome trick. I love doing this. It's the best way I found to categorize things and make sure that I don't lose them. Even with push rods, you can do that too. Just, yeah, really cool trick. I'm going to make sure that I leave this bolt just a little bit loose on here, so when I go to the other side, if this thing does fall from its own gravity, I'm not going to completely dump all of this oil, if there is any, onto the ground. So always just leave yourself a little locking bolt just in case. Okay, so we got our last bolt. See, if I hadn't put that bolt in on the other side, this thing would be leveraged up on here, and it would make it almost impossible to get this bolt out. Might also cause some damage too, so a little pro tip, always put a safety bolt in. So there we go, we got the oil pan off the engine. And again, this is another reason why you put that safety bolt on. Look how much oil is in here. Even after draining it out, and then this thing falls down, potentially damaging it, and you get oil everywhere. I've made these mistakes before, so that's why I'm warning you now. I know, I know what can happen. But yeah, let's take a look at the bottom of the engine here. So here we have our crank, our piston ends are coming down. We have our oil pump as well. And then you can see the oil pump pickup. And if you look at that screen, look at all the sludge that's on there. So we're gonna clean all this out and get this mud and debris off of here. And it should be good to go, but everything looks really nice. We're suspecting that it was possibly rebuilt not too long ago. It's a little surprising to see that the inside of this block is painted orange. Haven't really seen that before. That's kind of weird. So now you can get a little closer look at how the rest of it works too. So you have the oil coming up from the oil pump here. It goes out into the heat exchanger where fresh cold water cools the oil down. And it keeps the oil nice and cool, and it can travel back in through that little intake port there. But yeah, that's kind of neat how all that works. And then here is the seals right there going around. So we'll get all this cleaned up. So now the next step, now that we have it down to the short block, we're going to be using aircraft paint stripper on here to get all of this off. We'll clean off all of these sealing edges, tape them off, and get this thing prepped and ready for a fresh coat of paint. And then in the meantime as well, I have all the parts laying out over here. Q is going to work on getting all these cleaned up, stripped down, get all the brass cleaned up as well. And yeah, that should be pretty interesting to take a look at. If you guys have any questions or you want to see more in-depth details on how we're rebuilding one or more of these parts, please leave a comment and I'll take a look at them and make a video out of it. But yeah, lots of really interesting little pieces came off this thing, and that just about does everything for that engine. So thanks for watching the video today, guys. I'm actually going to end it there. I appreciate all your guys' support, and I hope to see you on the next video next week. Apologize again for the missed video a week before that. We just ran into a couple of obstacles there, so we're back to our regular Friday upload schedule, and we're happy and looking forward to lots of new content coming out here soon. So yeah, once again, thanks again for watching the video, and have a good rest of your day.